The message notification lit up my kitchen counter at 8:42 p.m. It wasn't the sound that made me look. It was the photo on the screen, my husband's face, the same portrait we had used at his funeral 5 years earlier. For a few seconds, I didn't move. My daughter-in-law had left her phone beside the fruit bowl when she rushed out to pick up my grandson from practice. The screen kept glowing, dimming, glowing again. Another message came through. The preview showed only 3 words. I miss you. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel before touching the phone. Not out of curiosity, out of habit. Everything in my house had its place, its order. Even grief had followed a routine after he died. When I unlocked the screen, the thread was already open. His contact name wasn't saved as anything suspicious, just his first name, the same way I had saved it years ago. But the conversation history was long. Scrolling didn't reach the beginning. Photos, voice notes, late-night timestamps, shared locations, dates stretching back months, then years. My chest felt tight, but my hand stayed steady. I opened the most recent message fully. There was a photo attached, not old, not archived, taken recently inside a room I recognized. My bedroom. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about grief or memory or someone who couldn't let go. It was ongoing, active, alive. I heard my daughter-in-law's car pull into the driveway, just as another message appeared on the screen. And this time, it was a voice recording. The voice recording was 12 seconds long. I pressed play before I could think. It was his voice. Not old, not pulled from some forgotten archive. Clear, calm, recent. I'll come by Thursday, same time. Make sure she's out. The message ended with a soft exhale, a sound I knew too well. For a moment, I stood in the kitchen, holding someone else's phone, listening to my dead husband plan a visit. The garage door opened. My daughter-in-law stepped inside. He's jangling, talking to my grandson about homework. I locked the screen and placed the phone exactly where she had left it, next to the fruit bowl. I didn't sit down. I didn't confront her. At 8:47 p.m., she picked up her phone and glanced at the screen. I watched her face, carefully. No panic, no rush to hide anything. She slipped it into her coat pocket and asked if I needed anything from the store tomorrow. I said no. That night, I did not mention what I had seen. At 9:32 p.m., after they left, I walked upstairs to my bedroom. Nothing looked disturbed. The bed was made. The curtains were drawn halfway, the way I prefer. My jewelry tray sat untouched on the dresser, but I knew the angle of that photo. It had been taken near the doorway, facing the bed. I stood in that exact spot and looked around. On the nightstand, my old brass lamp reflected faintly in the mirror. In the message photo, I had noticed the same reflection. The timestamp on that image was from 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, I had spent Thursday afternoon at the grocery store and then at the pharmacy. I remember because the pharmacist had changed the label on my blood pressure medication, and I had complained about it. I went downstairs and opened the small notebook I keep in the drawer by the phone charger. I wrote down the date from the message. Then I checked my calendar from that week. Thursday, 2 p.m. to 4:15 p.m., errands. I didn't sleep much. At 6:10 a.m., I logged into the shared family cloud account. My husband had set it up years ago so we could all access holiday photos. It had remained active after his death because my son insisted on keeping everything as it was. There were new uploads in a private folder I didn't recognize. The folder name was just a period, easy to miss. Inside were dozens of short video clips. Most were no longer than a minute, all recorded in my house. The kitchen, the hallway, my bedroom. In several clips, the person holding the camera spoke in a low voice. It was him, the same voice from the recording. I checked the file properties. The device used to upload the files matched my daughter-in-law's phone model. At 7:02 a.m., my son called to say he would be late for breakfast. He sounded normal, tired. He asked if I could watch my grandson's Saturday afternoon. I said yes. I did not ask questions. Instead, at 9:30 a.m., I drove to the small electronics store on Maple Street. The owner, Daniel, had installed my home Wi-Fi years ago. He knew the layout of my house. I told him I wanted to add 2 security cameras. Indoor. Discreet. He asked if something had happened. I said, I just want a record. By 3:15 p.m., 2 small cameras were installed. One in the hallway outside my bedroom. One inside the bedroom itself, angled toward the doorway. I didn't hide them, but I didn't announce them either. That evening, my daughter-in-law stopped by again to drop off a baking dish. She stayed only 6 minutes. Her phone remained in her hand the entire time. At 10:04 p.m., I reviewed the footage from earlier that afternoon. At 2:37 p.m., while I was at the bank, someone had entered the house. He used a key. He walked directly upstairs. He did not hesitate. The camera in the hallway captured his profile clearly as he passed. 5 years ago, we had buried a man with that face. He stayed in my bedroom for 14 minutes. He took another photo. He stood near the dresser, speaking softly into his phone. At 2:51 p.m., he left. No forced entry. No broken locks. I checked the spare key hook near the back door. Empty. I did not call the police. Not yet. At 11:18 p.m., my daughter-in-law texted me, "Everything okay tonight?" I looked at the message for a long time before replying. Yes. Why? She didn't answer. Instead of confronting anyone, I opened the shared cloud account again and downloaded every file onto an external hard drive. At midnight, I labeled the drive with a small piece of tape. June present. Then I placed it inside the metal filing cabinet in my office under the warranty papers and insurance documents. I knew 2 things clearly by then. First, my husband was not dead. Second, this had not started recently, at 12:36 a.m. As I sat at my desk reviewing timestamps, another notification appeared on my own phone. A message from an unknown number. Just 1 sentence. Don't open doors you can't close. I did not reply to the unknown number. At 12:41 a.m., I took a screenshot of the message, saved it to the same external drive, and powered my phone off for the night. Sleep wasn't the goal anymore. Accuracy was. At 7:05 a.m., I drove to the cemetery. His grave marker still stood where we had placed it. Clean. Maintained. My son paid for the upkeep annually. Fresh flowers rested at the base. Not from me. I hadn't visited in months. I photographed the headstone from 3 angles. Date of death. Inscription. Plot number. Documentation mattered now. From there, I drove to the county records office. It opened at 8:30 a.m. I was the second person in line. I requested a certified copy of his death certificate. The clerk printed it without hesitation. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Hospital listed. Attending physician signed. Everything appeared legitimate. At 9:12 a.m., I sat in my car and compared the certificate to the funeral home invoice I still kept in my filing cabinet at home. Matching dates, matching physician, but there was one procedural detail that stood out. No autopsy had been performed. At the time, I had accepted the explanation. Natural causes. He had been 58, but he smoked heavily and worked long hours. The hospital had said there was no suspicion of foul play. Now, I wondered who had declined the autopsy request. At 10:03 a.m., I returned home and pulled the original paperwork. The signature declining further examination was not mine. It belonged to my son. I wrote that down. 11:40 a.m., son declined autopsy. By afternoon, I began reviewing bank records. After his death, all joint accounts had been transferred. Insurance had paid out. The house had been refinanced under my name. Nothing unusual there, but one account remained open for 3 months after the funeral. A small business account he had used years earlier. The closing signature on that account wasn't mine either. It was my daughter-in-law's. I didn't call her. I drove instead to the bank branch where the account had been closed. At 2:25 p.m., I sat with the branch manager and requested transaction records from the final quarter before closure. He hesitated at first, but complied once I presented my ID and marital documentation. 3 large cash withdrawals had been made during those months. Each withdrawal occurred on Thursdays. Each withdrawal occurred between 2 o'clock and 3 p.m., the same time frame as the recent bedroom photo. Pattern recognition didn't require emotion, just repetition. I photographed the transaction ledger. At 4:10 p.m., I returned home and cross-referenced those withdrawal dates with the video clips from the cloud folder. 2 of those Thursdays matched video recordings inside my house, years apart, but identical entry patterns. Same key, same path upstairs. He had never stopped coming. At 6:32 p.m., my son arrived for dinner. My daughter-in-law followed 10 minutes later with my grandson. Routine evening. Television on. Homework at the table. I observed quietly. At 7:14 p.m., her phone buzzed again on the counter. This time, she saw me looking before picking it up. She flipped the screen face down immediately. Small behavior change. Logged mentally. At 7:22 p.m., my grandson asked where Grandpa was buried. School project. My son answered casually, explaining the cemetery location. My daughter-in-law stayed silent, focusing on her plate. No eye contact. No correction. At 8:03 p.m., she stepped outside to take a call. I noted the time. She stayed outside for 9 minutes. When she came back in, she avoided the kitchen entirely and sat beside my grandson on the couch. At 8:17 p.m., I excused myself upstairs and opened the live security feed on my phone. Front driveway camera, a black sedan, sat parked 2 houses down. Engine off, lights off. It remained there until 8:26 p.m. When she left at 8:30 p.m., the sedan pulled away seconds later. No confrontation, no accusations, just observation. At 9:05 p.m., I exported that segment of footage and labeled it vehicle, possible surveillance, or coordination. By then, the pattern was no longer circumstantial. It was operational. My husband was alive. My daughter-in-law was in direct contact with him. Financial transactions had supported his disappearance. And my son, intentionally or not, had signed the document that prevented medical verification of death. At 10:12 p.m., I reviewed the voice recording again. I'll come by Thursday. Same time. Make sure she's out. I opened my calendar. Upcoming Thursday, 2 p.m., hair appointment. He already knew my schedule. That was when the audience inside my own mind stopped observing and started choosing sides, not through emotion, but through logistics. Someone had orchestrated access to my home for 5 years using my grief as operational cover. At 11 p.m., I canceled my hair appointment, but I did not remove it from the shared family calendar. Instead, at 11:18 p.m., I adjusted the indoor camera angles slightly, enough to capture the entire bedroom doorway and the dresser drawers. No traps, no confrontations, just documentation. Because if Thursday was going to happen again, this time it would be recorded from start to finish. Thursday arrived without tension. At 1:52 p.m., I pulled my car out of the driveway and drove around the block. I parked behind the closed hardware store 2 streets over. From there, I could access the security feed without being seen. At 2:03 p.m., the back door opened. He entered using the spare key. He looked older than the man we buried, but not by much. Slightly thinner, hair shorter, same walk, same habit of adjusting his cuff before climbing stairs. He didn't hesitate. At 2:05 p.m., he reached my bedroom. The hallway camera captured his face clearly as he stepped inside. He closed the door behind him. At 2:07 p.m., he opened the dresser drawer where I kept important papers. He didn't search randomly. He went directly to the folder labeled Property Tax. He removed a document, photographed it, then placed it back precisely. At 2:11 p.m., his phone rang. He answered without looking at the screen. Yes, he said. She's gone. The voice on the other end was my daughter-in-law's. The audio was faint but recognizable. You have 10 minutes, she said. Then leave. I'll distract her at 5. He nodded, though she couldn't see him. I know the routine. That was the first boundary fully crossed. Not grief, not deception for protection. Coordination. At 2:14 p.m., he opened the jewelry tray and removed my wedding band. He held it for a few seconds, then placed it in his pocket. At 2:16 p.m., he spoke into his phone again. I'll send the file tonight. At 2:18 p.m., he left. Total time inside, 15 minutes. I waited until 2:40 p.m. before driving home. The house was quiet, undisturbed, exactly as he had left it. I walked upstairs slowly, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to see what had changed. The dresser drawer was aligned perfectly. The jewelry tray, however, had a faint smudge near the edge. My ring was gone. At 3:05 p.m., my daughter-in-law texted, "How was your appointment?" I replied at 3:07 p.m. "Fine. Still there." She didn't respond. That was step one of self-incrimination. Her timestamp placed her coordinating his visit while confirming my absence. At 5:12 p.m., she arrived with groceries. She walked in confidently, placed the bags on the counter, and asked if I wanted tea. I watched her hands. No ring on her finger that wasn't there before. No nervous behavior. At 5:19 p.m., she used the bathroom downstairs. Her phone remained on the kitchen counter. I didn't scroll. Instead, I opened the call log preview visible from the lock screen. 2:10 p.m., outgoing call, 6 minutes. No name saved, just a number. I photographed it with my own phone. That was step two. At 6:03 p.m., my son called to say he would work late. I asked him directly, "Do you remember signing the autopsy refusal?" There was silence. "Yes," he said finally. "The hospital said it wasn't necessary." "Who suggested that?" I asked. "Dad had a friend there. He said it would just delay things." He ended the call quickly. That answer added a new layer. At 8:40 p.m., I searched the phone number from the call log using a reverse directory service. The number was registered to a prepaid account, but the billing address linked to a P.O. box opened 3 years ago. The box was registered under a business name I recognized. It was the same name as the old business account that had stayed open after his death. That was step 3 beginning. The loop was tightening, not through confrontation, but through their own movements. At 9:15 p.m., I opened the cloud account again. A new upload appeared. Video clip, timestamp 2:12 p.m. I opened it. The clip showed him inside my bedroom, speaking directly into the camera. Property remains clear. Title still in her name. We proceed next month. His face filled the frame. Alive. Intentional. I downloaded the file and saved it alongside the camera footage from today. At 10:02 p.m., my daughter-in-law texted again. "You sound distant tonight." I responded at 10:05 p.m. "Just tired." She replied, "Everything is still on track." Those words weren't meant for me. She deleted the message within seconds. But not before I captured the notification preview. That completed step 2 of the loop, written confirmation of ongoing planning. At 10:40 p.m., I sat at my desk and laid out 3 documents side by side. Bank withdrawal ledger, security footage, still image, call log number linked to the business P.O. box. The connection wasn't emotional. It was structural. They weren't visiting for nostalgia. They were monitoring assets. At 11:03 p.m., another message from the unknown number appeared. "You weren't supposed to be home." I did not respond, because now the pattern was visible, and the third step, the one that would make this collapse procedural rather than personal, was already forming. Friday morning began quietly at 7:12 a.m. I printed still frames from the hallway camera, the bedroom footage, and the cloud video he had recorded himself. I labeled each image with date, time, and source device. At 8:05 a.m., I drove to the county records office again, not for death records this time, but property filings. My home title had never been transferred. No lien, no secondary claim. But 3 months earlier, a preliminary inquiry had been submitted requesting valuation history and equity assessment. The request had been withdrawn the same day. The applicant name listed on the inquiry was the same shell business connected to the P.O. box. That was the third step closing. They weren't just monitoring my house. They were preparing to leverage it. At 9:40 a.m., I scheduled a consultation with a property attorney recommended by the bank manager. I didn't mention deception. I spoke only in procedural terms. I want to understand how someone might attempt access to my home equity without ownership. He explained possible methods: forged consent, coerced refinancing, falsified incapacity claims. That last method stayed with me. At 11:18 a.m., I returned home and opened the cloud folder again. Another upload appeared. Timestamp, 10:52 a.m. The clip showed my husband seated in what looked like a rented office space. Behind him, file cabinets, neutral walls, temporary setup. He spoke directly toward the camera. She's aging faster than expected. If medical documentation supports diminished capacity, refinancing becomes automatic. He wasn't speaking to me. He was recording a status update. I downloaded the file. At 12:03 p.m., I drove to the police station. I didn't request patrol units or file accusations. I asked for a civil intake officer and presented the material as identity fraud and unlawful entry documentation. The officer watched the footage twice. He paused at the hallway camera still. "You buried this man?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He leaned back slowly. This becomes more than civil. At 1:27 p.m., 2 detectives joined the intake room. I provided the external hard drive, the transaction ledgers, the property inquiry printout, and the call log number. No emotion, no storytelling, just evidence sequencing. They asked if I felt in danger. I said, "No, but my property is." That phrasing shifted their posture. At 3:05 p.m., they requested permission to place temporary monitoring on my home entry points and phone records tied to the P.O. Box account. I signed consent forms. Procedural response had begun. At 6:14 p.m., my daughter-in-law called. Her voice was calm, but searching. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" she asked. I said, "Like what?" She paused. "Just calls. Activity. I thought someone might be watching the house." Subtext carrier. Projection disguised as concern. I replied, "If someone was, I'm sure they'd have a reason." She didn't press further. At 8:02 p.m., detectives notified me that the prepaid phone linked to her call logs had been active near my house every Thursday for 11 months. Tower pings confirmed stationary presence during my scheduled absences. At 9:30 p.m., they executed a quiet administrative check on the hospital listed in my husband's death certificate. The attending physician's signature belonged to a doctor who had retired 2 years before my husband's reported death. The hospital confirmed no cardiac arrest admission under his name. That was the institutional fracture point. At 10:11 p.m., detectives returned to my house to verify burial records. Cemetery administration confirmed the casket had been sealed per family request. No viewing post-preparation. My son had handled those arrangements personally. Saturday morning, 7:48 a.m., I received a procedural update call. Financial surveillance flagged attempted digital access to my mortgage portal overnight. Login credentials matched my husband's former password structure. Access attempt failed due to two-factor authentication. My phone. At 10:20 a.m., detectives traced the IP origin of that attempt. It came from a temporary office rental complex 20 miles away, the same complex visible in his recorded status video. By noon, a warrant was secured, not for emotional wrongdoing, for identity fraud, insurance deception, unlawful surveillance, and attempted financial exploitation. At 3:40 p.m., officers executed entry on the rented office. No public spectacle, no broadcast arrests, administrative removal, computers seized, hard drives cataloged. Inside those drives were property projections, insurance disbursement maps, and a scheduled refinance filing draft, dated 6 weeks ahead. My daughter-in-law's digital signature appeared on 2 preparatory forms. Sunday evening, 6:05 p.m., she arrived at my house unannounced. She stepped inside, cautiously, scanning the hallway as if expecting something altered. "Have you heard from Dad's old contacts lately?" she asked. I shook my head. She studied my face longer than usual. Then she said something that completed the loop fully. If anything surfaces, we should handle it privately. No need to involve authorities. Self-incrimination, finalized. Her awareness of exposure confirmed operational participation. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I simply asked if she wanted tea. She declined and left within 4 minutes. At 9:22 p.m., detectives informed me both suspects had been placed under formal investigation review pending financial fraud charges. No arrests yet, but asset freezes had begun. Their operational timeline had collapsed before execution, and I had never raised my voice once. The collapse didn't arrive loudly. It unfolded through delays, absences, and administrative silence. Monday morning, 8:06 a.m., my daughter-in-law failed to drop my grandson off at school on time. That had never happened before. My son texted me asking if she had stayed overnight at my house. She hadn't. At 9:12 a.m., my son called again, voice tighter this time. She says her accounts are frozen. Do you know anything about that? I said I didn't handle her banking. He accepted the answer without suspicion. At 10:30 a.m., an email misfire occurred. She had accidentally forwarded a document to the wrong recipient. A school PDA mailing list instead of a private contact. The attachment was a scanned draft refinance projection tied to my property address. The email was recalled within minutes, but not before 3 recipients had opened it. By noon, one of those recipients, an accountant by profession, replied asking if I was selling my home. I responded simply, no. At 1:45 p.m., my son left work early. He arrived at my house at 2:10 p.m. holding printed bank notices. Joint credit lines he shared with his wife had been flagged for review. He asked if I had filed anything legal recently. I told him I had reviewed property protections after identity theft concerns. That phrasing landed carefully. He didn't press further. At 4:22 p.m., my daughter-in-law texted me for the first time that day. Have you spoken to anyone about our family finances? I replied, no. Why would I? She didn't respond. Tuesday brought professional fractures. At 9:05 a.m., her employer placed her on temporary administrative leave pending document verification. Apparently, digital signatures tied to mortgage projections had triggered compliance alerts when the financial investigation opened. She came to my house at 11:40 a.m., not angry, controlled. She asked if we could sit. I said we could stand. She studied the hallway camera briefly before speaking. You know something is happening, she said. I didn't confirm or deny. She continued, if this becomes public, it affects everyone, your grandson included. Subtext carrier. Consequences framed as shared burden. I replied. Then it should have been handled carefully. She watched my face for reaction. There wasn't one. She left without raising her voice. Wednesday morning, 7:58 a.m., my son called again. He asked if I had seen his father recently. The question came out unevenly, like he already suspected the answer. I said, why do you ask? He hesitated. Someone contacted me claiming Dad's insurance policy was fraudulent. I didn't respond immediately. He filled the silence himself. They said legal review was underway. I told him legal matters follow evidence, not rumors. He ended the call quietly. By Thursday, operational stress began showing in logistical errors. My daughter-in-law missed a scheduled compliance interview. She arrived 30 minutes late to another. Her phone activity, monitored now through investigative warrants, showed repeated outgoing calls to the prepaid number, though that line had been seized days earlier. Unanswered calls stacked in her logs. At 3:18 p.m., she sent me a message she deleted almost instantly. The preview still appeared. Why didn't you say anything sooner? I did not acknowledge it. Friday brought policy changes. The bank handling my mortgage issued a formal security escalation notice. All refinancing activity tied to my property required in-person biometric verification moving forward. No remote filings permitted. That procedural barrier closed the final financial pathway they had prepared. Saturday afternoon, social fallout surfaced. A mutual church acquaintance stopped me after service and asked gently if everything was all right at home. Apparently, rumors had begun circulating about documentation issues involving my family. I reassured her calmly that legal reviews were routine. No elaboration. Sunday evening, my son came alone. He sat at the kitchen table without removing his coat. He asked only one question. Did you know Dad was alive? I poured tea before answering. I knew someone was entering my house. He nodded slowly, absorbing the phrasing. He didn't defend his wife. He didn't accuse me. He simply sat there, processing the structural reality of what had happened. At 7:42 p.m., he stood to leave, then paused near the doorway. If investigators contact you again, he said, cooperate fully. I told him I already had. He left without finishing his tea. By Monday, formal financial collapse completed. Insurance providers issued recovery notices. Accounts tied to the fraudulent death claim were frozen pending restitution calculations. The rented office lease had been terminated early due to investigative seizure. Administrative dismantling piece by piece. No confrontations. No shouting. Just systems correcting what had been manipulated. And through all of it, I remained silent, not out of restraint, but because silence kept the record clean.